this building. So welcome, Tricia.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So how did you end up at the archive?
At the archives. So my journey to the archives in many ways began at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, where when the IMA received the house, the Miller house and garden from the Miller children, one thing that came to the museum, in addition to the house and the garden, was this tremendous collection of archival documents that Irwin Management gave to the museum. And I just happened to be at the museum at the same time that, as the museum was trying to figure out how are we going to interpret the house. And I was so lucky to just be able to read, I think it's about 30,000 documents about the history of the house. And it was from the letters, 2 letters that Mr. Miller wrote in 1953, one to Alexander Gerard and one to Eero Saarinen, saying, we bought some property last night, will you come down and look at it for us? And I think the last document was, there were a couple of emails that were exchanged a couple of months after Mrs. Miller's death. And so that was, I will say, my reintroduction to Columbus, and then also worked on a project down here on the restoration and history of Jean Tongly's Chaos.
Which is what this mediocre image of comments up there. I visited the archives a couple times, and there's really some spectacular stuff in there, like drawings of this, drawings of the commons.
Right.
So you're kind of keeping these artifacts, and in a way, kind of stewarding the history of things like the commons, which is different now, but kind of lives on through your archive. So, what are some of the most exciting projects you're working on, or some of the most exciting things that you've come across as you've been organizing it?
That, in some ways, it's such a hard question because I think that one of the things I love about working in an archive is that every day is a discovery of new materials that I haven't had an opportunity to see yet. So it's like, oh my God, look at this. But I think to maybe bring it back to Exhibit Columbus, one thing that's been really exciting with Exhibit Columbus is how I've been able to work with the different designers. And it's been fascinating that, I remember when during the symposium, Yugon Kim, for instance, whose conversation plinth is out front, the day that he was here, or that he came into town, he said, I need to start doing research today. And watching him use these materials to help inform his practice and his design. And then others who came very late in the process. And so it's just been really great to see how people use our historic documents, not just in the, one of the examples I like to give is, we do get a lot of requests for things like, I need to see a drawing to see where that pipe goes. Very practical, important if you're a building owner or a contractor. It's you pull out one drawing and you're like, oh, okay, there's that pipe. But to be working with people who are so creative and who are using the archives as inspiration for the future is, to me, just has been one of the greatest things about Exhibit Columbus.
What are some of the projects that nobody knows about that are in the archive?
There's a project, John Carl Warneke, who designed Mabel McDowell School, also worked on the development of residential housing around Otter Creek. I know, Louis Joyner. And so that's, it's just one of these, it's not something, if Louis doesn't know that that's a project, probably very few people in Columbus know that that's a project. There's also just, some small things, like there was a little kind of kiosk model that was at the Miller House, and this was sort of one of these fun things of seeing how the Miller House collection connected to some of the things at the archive here. And this little kiosk, I think it's red, and it's sort of a picnic bench with an umbrella, and the attribution at the IMA was wrong, and lo and behold, we have those drawings here by someone named Warren Kafka. I haven't had time to investigate who Warren Kafka was, but so you just sort of these small and large projects. Yeah.
And what about some of the unbuilt projects?
So there are two that I think about. One is we have this very sweet little model that's about 10 inches by 10 inches of a Gothic revival church by Edmund Gilchrist, and it dates to the late 1930s, and Edmund Gilchrist was the original architect that was selected by the Irwin Sweeney Miller family to design First Christian. He became ill and couldn't finish the commission, and so the family went and found Eliel Saarinen, and so I love to pull out this like very, very traditional model and say, what would have happened to Columbus if that Gothic revival church were across the street from where we are now? So, so that's one, which is just, I don't know why he became, I don't know why he was ill, or it's a remarkable turn, right? To just have our first modern building happen because of the illness of someone. I guess it's a good thing. Don't you really want to? One of the other ones is we have several models by Morphosis for the Cummins Child Care Center. And this was a building that was going to be, I think, between 2nd and 3rd Street. I'm looking up at Will, 2nd and 3rd Street.
Site of First Financial.
Pardon me? Where First Financial is. And the project didn't happen, and as I understand it, there were a couple of forces. And one was that there was a little bit of a downturn for Cummins, and so some things were put on hold. There was also a little bit of concern that this child care center was maybe favoring folks in Cummins who worked in the corporate headquarters. When the economy turned around for Cummins, they went back to Morphosis. They were not able to do the project at that time. That's when Carlos Jimenez was eventually selected, and a different site was selected as well. And so I think that I like these two unrealized projects because they just help to tell our story of how ideas are pursued and how, I suppose, some serendipity really changes or impacts the design of the city.
Well, thank you for stopping by.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It was really great to have you. And if anybody needs anything, needs to know anything about Columbus, Tricia can help you. How is one last question. How was when you inherited the archive? It was not totally organized, I'd say. And so, how is it?
Stop it.
How is it?
I'm going to say that the archives are still not totally organized because it's a mammoth project. I mean, this is the 50th year of collecting materials for the archives, and it was a really, I think, a very modest start to the project to just really document more photography and ephemera about the architecture to help people who come to the library, and it really grew over time. And it's always been located in this building, but how it's been organized in terms of staffing or volunteers has just varied greatly. The collection is we have a good catalog, I'll say, for the collection. We're a little bit outdated, which you would expect for an organization that for many years didn't have a professional archivist and that relied on volunteers and the goodness of the library offering staff and that sort of thing. So we're working on it though.
Exciting.
Yeah, and I'll say, actually, in that regard, one of the exciting things is that we just the library received a grant. I'm looking up at Jason Hatton up there. The library received a grant to digitize a collection related to 301 Washington Street. And it's efforts like this in collaboration with other organizations that I think are going to help the collection become more known and in that way of being more organized and allowing people to find us.
Great.